Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to this week's episode of the Sky Sports F1 podcast with me, Matt Baker. Joining me to reflect on a dominant win for Max Verstappen out in Japan, we've got our two finest analysts with us, Karun, Chandhok and Martin Brundle. Hello to both of you. Martin, I'll start with you. How was your weekend? Were you up at 3 a.m. on Friday and Saturday, watching the practice sessions, or did you maybe watch them a little bit on repeat?
No, I watched them live.
Did you?
I did.
Amazing.
But yeah. And saw the studio, saw the races, saw the weather and the various dramas and cars in the wall. And I missed Suzuka, actually. I kind of wished I was there, but it's not on my roster this year of 16 races.
Yeah, no, it did look very special, and also so strange to have it so close to the last time we were at Suzuka. But if you're going to go to a racetrack twice, Suzuka's a pretty good one to go to. Karun, now we were just talking about this before we started recording. You were on your bike for the race.
I was. It was. I thought, well, it might as well be efficient. Kids were asleep. It was all peaceful. So I got on my turbo trainer at home and did a nice ride while watching the race. So that was multitasking.
Multitasking indeed. Right. Plenty coming up. We've got loads to discuss, and we're going to, appreciate it's now a Tuesday. The race was on Sunday morning. So we're going to touch on the race a bit, but I think we'll get more into kind of the implications of the results. And we're going to get on to Max's win, but also some strong words as well from Toto Wolff on Max's domination. We're also going to get into some movers and shakers in the driver market in Formula One, which is really hotting up. Only 4 races in, but it seems that's what we're talking about as well. We're also going to have a quick look ahead to China and that being the sprint race as well. We've had some comments from that on drivers too. But before we do all of that, time for our What I've Learned feature. Martin, this is your first time on the podcast this year, so I did give you a heads up. What have you learned from this week in Formula One?
What I've learned is that despite my great hopes, wishes, expectations, that the pack had closed the gap a little bit to Red Bull after Australia, that when we went to one of the all-time great handling circuits, formerly known and currently known as Suzuka, Red Bull were first and second at a canter, and it sort of broke my heart a little bit, really, because I thought it might be a bit closer at the front. But that track was always going to suit Red Bull.
It certainly was, wasn't it? Yeah, I don't think many people were surprised that it was a Red Bull 1-2. Karun, what did you learn?
I learned that Carlos Sainz's job interview for wherever he ends up next year is still going very well. 3 podiums out of 3 starts this season. I learned that my apology to Yuki Tsunoda over our Australian Grand Prix weekend was the right thing to do, because I said last year that they should have signed Liam Lawson and Daniel Ricciardo and had Yuki as reserve. And he's, to my delight, actually, proving me wrong, because he was superb all weekend. And most importantly, I learned that Crofty's favourite burger, the prawn burger of Japan at McDonald's, is now a double prawn burger. He sent me a very excited picture of him at Yokkaichi Station.
I do remember hearing about the prawn burger and how Crofty is very fond of a prawn burger. So that's good to hear they've upgraded it. And yeah, points for Yuki Tsunoda at his home Grand Prix. Really, really good story. So look, let's talk a little bit then about the race, and particularly I want to start with Toto Wolff's comments after the race. This was to the written media. He said, plain and simple, quote, "No one is going to catch Max this year." Martin, is Toto right to put it so bluntly after 4 races?
Well, Toto wears his heart on his sleeve, doesn't he? Especially when we catch him just after yet another disappointment in the Mercedes team at the moment. He tends to blurt it out and as to what he thinks about his own team and other teams. I think it's kind of stating the obvious. The car's strong. Max is at the peak of his game. His teammate Sergio Perez is more comfortable, the 2024 car, but he's not exactly wearing Max's mirrors out at the same time, is he? So it does look, unless McLaren, Ferrari, maybe Aston Martin, kind of Mercedes come up with some kind of genius upgrade that closes the gap, you'd have to say that, yeah, it does look as if they've got both championships under control, but we've got 20 races to go yet. And as we saw in Australia, you never know what's going to happen.
Marathon, not a sprint. Karun, what's your take on those comments from Toto?
I think he's a man who's frustrated, isn't he? You know, I think the best Mercedes was 45 seconds off the win, but if we take the Red Bulls out of it, they were still 25 seconds behind the best non-Red Bull, which is a huge amount in a Grand Prix. Toto made an interesting comment to Ted, I thought, after the race, where he said, the first stint was terrible and after that was not so bad. I look back at some of the numbers and it's a little bit better, but I mean, like in the first stint, he lost 11 seconds to Sainz in 15 laps, which is 3/4 of a second nearly. And after that, he still lost on average about 0.6 per lap. So yeah, it was a little bit better, but not a lot better. So I think they were the comments of a frustrated man who's come off a tremendous run of success and is again staring at another season of the team that he co-owns, unlikely to win the World Championship. And that's not the standards that he's used to or expects, I think, from the team.
I was going to say, yeah, definitely not the standard he expects. He actually went on to say, and this was quite a funny moment in the press conference, he went on to compliment Max's driving style, saying how he's performing spectacularly. You can see the way he manages the tyres, and it's now basically a case of the best of the rest. That's a fact. That was put to Verstappen in the press conference, and he said that Toto's been saying a lot of nice things about him recently, which I thought was quite funny and might be some clever management there from Toto. But I mean, Martin, it must be tough for someone like Toto Wolff, like Karun said, who's so used to success now for the third year in a row, and dare we say maybe up until 2026, up until those regulations change. There isn't much reason for optimism that he can close the gap on Red Bull, is there?
Well, they've got to understand this car, and I think that's a grave concern for all of the people there. And, there's a lot of very clever people with a huge amount of resource and performance tools and budget. So I'm not going to try and second guess what's wrong with it because, or state what I think is wrong with it, because if they don't know, then I certainly don't know in the team. They cannot get a handle on these ground effect cars. This is the third season. They turn up, they think they've aced it, a lot of positive noises, and then it still bounces a little bit with the porpoising. But their problem is, from time to time, thing performs beautifully, and they're really quite fast in phases, but they can't seem to reproduce that session to session, let alone day to day, let alone Grand Prix to Grand Prix. So this is the problem they've got, is this knife edge of a car that sometimes looks like it's come, they finally sorted it, and more of the time that they just can't understand it. And when you've got that, when all of your tools and all your clever people don't correlate with the stopwatch and the performance of other cars on the track, and you can't seem to nail it down, then that's really frustrating and I would say very worrying.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some worried faces at Mercedes. Karun, just explain to listeners and viewers about 2026. It seems a long way off. It's a year and most of a season's time away. But why is that so significant for Formula One? And what's being done behind the scenes to ensure that teams are ready for the regulation changes?
Well, first of all, the regulations haven't fully been defined yet. What we do know is that the engines of the internal combustion engine, the amount of power from that will be reduced compared to the battery. So Formula One cars have been hybrid since 2014. The amount of hybrid power from the electric side is going to be now equal to the amount of power from the ICE, so 50-50, which is a big change from the power unit side. Now, from what we understand, there's still a lot of conversations going on about how they're going to make that work, because in order to harvest the amount of energy and to get the amount of energy you need to deploy, you have to take a significant amount of drag off the car. So there's a lot of conversations going on between the teams and the FIA and Formula One's technical department on just what the best way is for that. So at the moment, actually, there's a lot of conversation, but no definition yet in terms of what the chassis rules are going to be. For me, this is actually... and Martin, you might correct me, but I think this is the first time I could recall where the chassis rules are being dictated by the engine rules. We've been used to, in the last 75 years of the World Championship, that, the engine's the engine, it's whatever it is plonked into the back of the regulations designed for the chassis with aero and wings and active suspension coming and going and all that sort of stuff. But this is the first time where the PU rules have been defined, and then they've gone, oh, hang on a second, we're going to have to adapt the chassis rules to make sure that the cars aren't lifting and coasting halfway down the straight. So there's still a lot to be defined, but in summary, Matt, there's a big regulation change coming once again in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be really concerned about this because here we are 22 months away from these cars running and it's not defined. It's going to have active aerodynamics as well, with a lot more wing movement than we currently see with the DRS drag reduction system. And as Karun explained, a lot more battery power, so the cars are probably going to be heavier, more complex, and they've got to get the harvesting and deployment sorted out. And it feels to me like these regulations should have been cast in stone a good year or so ago. And then you've got a new team coming in like Audi that are aiming at them, and Red Bull Powertrains is a startup, albeit with Ford assistance. But there's a lot of unknowns, and I hope we're getting that right. You know, I expressed in commentary recently that I felt these hybrid engines were perhaps the worst decision that Formula One ever made in terms of the cars have become so big and so complex. But my goodness, they're fast and impressive. Now, we kind of sorted it out now, but in the early days, it was a pain. And we don't want to go through that again that we had in 2014, where one power unit was massively dominant, or maybe one team with the aero gets it absolutely right. It's a shame. I think what that also means is what you're seeing in 2024 will be largely locked in for 2025, because who's going to have the resource, the budget, the time to do a lot of work on their 2025 car and updating that through the season when it's such a step change for 2026. So I think the teams will be getting quite edgy and angsty about, right, what are we aiming at? What are the regulations? We need to start putting some things to bed. But luckily, with the incredible resource and ingenuity of Formula One, they'll sort it out. They will get it sorted out. And that's why, like in the pandemic, it was Formula One who came up with the ventilators, designed them, created and got them out to market faster than anybody else could even sort of dream of. So, we have the capability to do it, but I don't know why we put ourselves under so much stress here.
Karun, what's the timescale then? What in an ideal world, maybe using the 2022 regulation change? Actually, I know that's unique because of COVID and we delayed it a year. Maybe another regulation change before that. How long would the teams want to know about the regulation changes before they happen?
I think there's a balance there, because if you give them too much time, then they simulate everything to death and spend a whole lot of money on it. So I think we do want some sort of control over that. But I agree with Martin. We're getting to a point now where it has to be defined. I think the teams have all, from what I understand, and from when I spoke to some of the technical people of the teams in Jeddah, they were hoping for the rules to be locked in 100% by June. But the feeling from the paddock is that they're not going to get that. And this conversation could rumble on into later this year. And they think that's just a bit too late. They would like, a solid 18 to 20 months before the start of the first race or the first test to have the rules set in stone. And then there's going to be some clarifications. There's going to be, some amount of questioning along the process. But you want to have, the bulk of it sorted out, which it's getting tight now. We're early April already. You're only talking 6-7 weeks away, and they still haven't got any firm clarity in terms of what these movable aero bits are going to be and how they're going to make it all work.
Shifting focus then to this season, and I wonder after 4 races now, if we could comfortably say we have a competitive order. Martin, to my mind, it's Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, and then Mercedes sort of / Aston Martin in that 4th, 5th place. When we talked pre-season, it's always kind of saying, give it 4 races, give it till we've had a variety of tracks. Are you comfortable with that list in that order? Do you think after 4 races that is roughly where we're at in Formula One at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that, Matt. Probably what's more difficult to define is the next 5. Well, Alpine, I think, are pretty much parked at the back of that one. But once again, all the great racing's in the second half of the field. Now, I know a lot of fans are saying, well, that's not for the win or it's not for the podium. But it's desperate back there, isn't it? For the last few championship points that those top five you just mentioned might leave on the table if they have a problem, trip over each other or whatever. So, and Yuki Tsunoda has hoovered up some of those, and Haas, and I mean, it is, and the sort of positions they'll have at the end of the season mean they've got to take those few slim pickings off the table, and that's why we're seeing such, feisty racing back there. But yeah, I think until we see the upgrade to some of the cars coming up in the next few races, whether they can really close the gap, it's hard. It's hard to find a 10th, let alone a quarter of a second. And in any event, who's to say Red Bull won't find a 10th or another 2 tenths anyway? So I think it's fair to say that that's the order. And it really depends as to which of Aston Martin and Mercedes are on form on any given weekend, as to which way round you'd put those two. But when you look at it, McLaren, because both drivers scored points in all 4 races, McLaren have got twice as many points already as Aston and Mercedes.
Have you been impressed, Karun, then, with Ferrari sort of cementing that second position? Maybe last year you wouldn't, I don't know, would you have said Ferrari were comfortably the second best team last year? Compare it with this season, where it feels like they've cemented that position now as the second fastest team.
I think towards the end of last season, they were the second fastest. Leclerc took that run of, 5 in a row front row qualifying spots. Carlos obviously won in Singapore. So I think towards the end of the year, they were the second fastest team, and they've just built on that. I think they've done a good job. They've done a solid job. They've brought themselves closer. If you look at the time gap between the best Ferrari and the best Red Bull in Suzuka now versus 6 months ago, they are closer. There's no doubt about it. And they've sort of broken the back of McLaren, Mercedes, and Aston, isn't it? That we thought that was a gang of 4 chasing Red Bull, but I think you are right in saying now it's a gang of 3 behind Ferrari. I think the worry for Aston is, again, they seem to have one car scoring, right? I think you can't when it's so tight. And there's a bit of a haves and have-nots. I think there's a Class A, Class B, maybe is a better way to describe it. The top 5 teams, I think this year have broken away from the bottom 5 a bit more. There is that split. And it does feel like on the first 4 weekends, you've got the top 9 locked in by those teams, and then the bottom 5 teams are basically competing against Stroll for that last point. That seems to be the way it's playing out at the moment. And it's when you come into the things like the driver market, you've got a guy, we just mentioned Sainz earlier, who is unemployed. He may not get a seat at Red Bull, might not get a seat at Mercedes. But he's probably not going to get a seat at Aston Martin either, because if Fernando doesn't go anywhere and Lance is holding that seat, suddenly you've got a race winner from the last 2 seasons who's potentially looking at one of the sort of bottom 5 teams for his future, which is, I think, a bit of a shame. And I get it's only 4 races in, it's early in the year, but that's the indications.
That's a perfect segue into our driver market section and talking about Carlos Sainz, because it is unbelievable that he hasn't yet been snapped up and signed. Martin, comes to you on this. There probably is nothing more Carlos could be doing right now in Formula One to be proving that he's deserving of a seat. If you did have a crystal ball, where would you see Carlos's future in Formula One over the next few years?
It's really tough for him. In the pre-season stuff, I said I thought he was going to fly this year because the pressure's off. He can drive for himself a little bit more. The team have biffed him off at Lewis Hamilton, and his natural talent's always going to flow. There's nothing to lose, everything to gain. All of the right mentality to just go and fly and really just take it to everybody and show everybody how wrong they are. And that's exactly what he's done. And he's let Charles Leclerc floundering to an extent in some respects, but I would never underestimate Charles Leclerc, but I'd never underestimate Carlos Sainz either. Can understand what Ferrari have done. 2 biggest brands in Formula 1 probably are Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton right now, and they're joining up, and it's a great story. I think Mercedes, if Antonelli's ready, they'll try and put Antonelli in Lewis Hamilton's seat. Kimi Antonelli, the Italian, currently 17-year-old until August. I agree. If Fernando Alonso stays at Aston Martin, they're hardly going to Lawrence Stroll's hardly going to biff his son out of there unless he doesn't want to do it anymore. But he's looks like he does. So will Perez keep the Red Bull seat? That's the key. That's the cork in the bottle. Where does that? Because putting Sainz in the Red Bull would be a no-brainer for me, or an Aston Martin or a Mercedes-Benz for that matter. He's now got the experience, got the speed, he's still got youth on his side to an extent. So the problem Team Sainz have is that Sauber, let's call them Audi going forward, putting him under pressure to do a long-term deal, which means he will then be at Sauber next year, treading water, and then hanging all of his chances on how quickly Audi can get their team and their power unit together and become competitive. And that's no small task. So, he could actually go off and have a really serious 3, even 4 seasons with another team and still join Audi when they're ripe and ready to go. So, but they're putting him under pressure to sign, and I don't see the other 3 teams ready to give in to that pressure and sign Sainz. So they've got a bit of a standoff. I think my advice to Carlos and his dad would be just things happen very quickly in this business. 2 weeks, a very long time in Formula One, and just keep your options open.
Is it, Karun, the craziest idea in the world? And I did get shot down on the podcast for saying this a few weeks ago, but I'm going to try it again, see what reaction I get.
New audience, go on.
Yeah, new audience. Could he take a year out? Is there any world in which he says there's no drive for me this year that's going to see me near the front of the grid? Yeah, sure, the Sauber Audi project, but we know that is more than likely next year going to be scratching around at the back of the grid. So does he take a year out?
We've seen drivers take a year out because they didn't get the seat they wanted, but they were the ones who had already won their championships and had nothing to prove. Prost, Lauda, Mansell, they went off to do other things, or in Prost's case, he took a year out, signed his contract early with Williams, knew he was going to come back and win a championship. So I think it's different in Carlos's case. He's at a different stage of his life, different stage of his career. He's yet to get that championship run, that chance to challenge for the championship, let alone win one. So I think it's not something he'd be looking at doing at this stage of his life. And I fully agree with Martin. I mean, Audi, with the best will of the world, and they've got tremendous funding, backing, and have poured a lot of money into this project already and will continue to do so. But F1's tough. If you arrive in 26, I'd say it's at least 3 seasons before you start to really start punching at the sharp end and being a championship contender, a race contender. So for Carlos, he'll be 30 next year. Does he want to spend his prime building a project which may or may not pay dividends? Probably not. I think with Antonelli is an interesting one because, if they wait 2 years for him and get him experienced at another team, whether it's Williams or somewhere else, find him a seat, and he then joins Mercedes in 2027, and I do believe he is something special. I saw him in an F3 test earlier this year, and he was extraordinary to watch, but he's still quite raw, still quite young. 2027, he'll still only be 20 years old. Mercedes will still get another 20 years of benefit out of him. But I think for me, it's really important in this big regulation change between 25 and 26 to try and have experienced drivers. I think you want to have people who can guide the team and help this transition into particularly that first year of regulation change, especially Mercedes-Benz as a works manufacturer engine team as well.
Final point then on Carlos Sainz, Martin. Is there any stage this season where Ferrari and Fred Vasseur sit down and go, have we let go of the wrong driver?
Well, if they do, they certainly won't be letting us know about it. They've made their decisions. Charles is a world-class racing driver. What they've done is they had a great pairing, and they've got a great pairing now, and they're losing that really. That are just about manageable together, considering how competitive they are. They're future-proof, and they're just perfect. They're great marketing kits. They're great everything, really. and they've broken that up because obviously they want to take Lewis because he's a 7-time world champion and he transcends our sport by some margin. So it's, have they let the wrong one go, or should they have let either of them go? We can debate that all day long, but there's no point in wasting heartbeats on that. That's what Ferrari are going to do, and we'll see what Lewis can do in a Ferrari. Will it be an Alonso Vettel near miss, or will it be a Michael Schumacher, fantastic race-winning, championship-winning crusade? We're a few months away from finding out how that's going to go. But, there's no point in Ferrari looking over their shoulder wondering that. And they made their decisions. They wanted Lewis in the car and they got him, and they'll make the most of it.
They certainly will, yeah. And obviously, as we spoke about a lot when Lewis signed at Ferrari, as a pure business decision with the stock price going up so much, they've obviously made huge inroads with that too. So yeah, very, very interesting stuff. Martin, you mentioned that Perez was the cork in the bottle, which I think is a brilliant way of putting the expression of what his future means for the rest of the lineup in 2025. What do you make of his start to the season? He's had 3 second places from 4 races. Is he doing everything possible to put a case forward for that second Red Bull seat?
Yeah, to an extent. He didn't win Australia when Max's car failed, which is what Red Bull would want him to do. He's clearly more comfortable with this car and himself and driving nicely. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen either, do we? It seems to be calming down a lot. The concept of Max having some kind of key man or management clause in his contract where he can exit should he want to, that would create a whole new conversation. But so let's assume that's not happening at the moment. I think commercially it's very useful for Red Bull to have Sergio Perez in the car, as well as, he's very experienced. He doesn't throw it in the wall a lot, and he doesn't really trouble Max. He's fast enough to keep Max on his toes, but not to really trouble him. He's the perfect driver in that seat at the moment. So I think there's the reason why Sergio's been in that car so long, and that's because he suits Red Bull and what they need at the moment. And I don't think that's particularly changed, unless they think somebody else is coming on where they must take the opportunity. I think the good news here is that Ollie Behrman and Liam Lawson have kind of changed the mood a little bit, because Formula One teams have been so cautious on their driver lineups and they've stayed away. That's why we've seen multiple F2 champions not make it into F1 recently. And all of a sudden, maybe the kids can jump in and do a great job, as Ollie Behrman did in Jeddah, and Liam Lawson did in Zandvoort last year, for example. So I think that's kind of opened the thinking up a little bit of the teams, and that plays into Antonelli's hands as well in that respect. So right now, and I agree very much with what Karun said a little while ago, that moving into this great unknown of the 2026 car, certainty and experience and feedback will be pivotal. And I think a team like Red Bull might just think this is working, especially if they win both championships comfortably again. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Karun, what if then RB had a fighting Daniel Ricciardo at the peak of his powers, right there with Yuki Tsunoda, knocking on the door and making a case for that second Red Bull seat? Do you think we'd be having a different conversation now?
I don't know, because it's all relative, isn't it? The reality is Perez seems to have raised his game. His qualifying in Japan was the best I think we've seen him in a very, very long time. Obviously, Melbourne was the one where he needed to step up on a day where Max had an issue and he didn't, so that is a negative. But broadly, he started the season quite well. Now, he did the same last year. We'll have to see if he can carry it on for the rest of the year. At the moment, he's making a pretty good case not to be replaced. And also, I think, obviously, there was a bit of needle between him and Max after, I think it was Monaco, was it last year or the year before? There's been a needle around
Brazil
that
as well, yeah.
Yeah, but that all seems to have calmed down amongst the rest of the sort of Red Bull chaos. And I think Max and Jos and, should we call them Team Max, quite like having Perez there. You know, they know where he is. He's a sort of safe 3-4 tenths away, and it's relatively peaceful. So whether they want to upset the Apple car, and we know they wield a strong amount of power, as you know, as they should for a guy who's won over 50 Grand Prix in that team. He does wield a lot of power, and I imagine saying to him, I feel, well, I think you're bringing Carlos Sainz in here because we think he could be a bit more competitive. Not convinced that'll go down as well as having Perez, who he's got quite well covered.
Yeah, well, look, time will tell. There is so much movement within the driver market. It's gonna be a story that rumbles on. But to use your brilliant expression, Martin, again, cork in the bottle. If it goes, I feel like a lot is going to fall into place quite quickly. And as you said, 2 weeks is a very long time in Formula One. Let's move it on and look ahead to next week and China. It's our first time back in China for 5 years. The big story that's sort of dominating the Chinese Grand Prix at the moment is the fact it's a sprint race. And brilliant. I think we all agree that we maybe like a sprint race of a weekend. It spices things up. It gives us something different to talk about. And we've obviously only got 6 this year. The issue that maybe the drivers are having with putting Shanghai as a sprint race is that we haven't been there for 5 years. And therefore, going onto a track without that, with limited running, remember, you'll only get FP1 as your practice session before going into qualifying for the sprint. Look, I've got 2 drivers here, so this is a perfect forum to debate this. Martin, I'll start with you. If you only had one practice session before going on a track you hadn't been on for 5 years, how would you feel?
They've got the simulators. Many of them know the track well. It's a track that's generated some great racing in the past. And we do often see on a weekend with red flags, with weather, a driver might have an engine or gearbox problem and misses a complete session or throws it in the hedge or something like that. And they just have to pick themselves up and get on with it. So honestly, I don't think it's a problem. They know their way around there. The simulators are clearly pretty damn good and pretty realistic. And they will all have been working hard on those. So they'll turn up pretty well prepared. The cars won't be a million miles off on setup. And they'll just get on with it. Honestly, I don't. It's an extra challenge, but I don't see it as a factor personally.
I guess for us fans, Karun, it creates so much uncertainty, doesn't it? Because they won't have all this data. They won't be able to predict and do the race strategies in the way that they might do on a normal race weekend. It creates jeopardy and a bit of uncertainty.
Oh, if I was a driver or a team member, I'd hate it, and I'd have all the same complaints they do. But now on the side of the fence that we are now, I think it's great. You know, we want them going into the unknown. We want them to go into that Friday evening qualifying for the sprint, not knowing 100% if the setup is right. And guess what? With the change of the format from last year to this year, in terms of the order of the sessions, it means that they'll have the opportunity to change the car and change the setup. So you get 2 bites of the cherry, you know, and actually they don't just go into Parc Fermé after FP1, which is an important change. So I think it's fine. I think it's going to be a fun weekend to watch. And we get good racing there because you get quite big. It's a very different track. It's a front left limited track. The front left tire takes a bigger beating around there than anywhere else on the calendar. So actually, in terms of trying to get the setup right and managing that balance in the tire, it is a very tough track to get the car right. And I think that will be interesting to watch.
I mean, a balancing point is Ollie Behrman, his second part of his race after the pit stop in Jeddah was on a hard compound tire he'd never driven on in his life. And he was outstanding on it, you know, because they only get 2 sets a weekend. And it was, you know, he managed it. He worked out what he got underneath him, dialed in and got on with it, and was outstanding. And, you know, this is a kid who got dropped in on a Saturday morning. So I think, you know, the weather conditions there could be challenging, and I love that long back straight. And there's a good series of corners which teed him up nicely as well. So I'm pleased to see Formula One back there.
And it's been resurfaced. Karun, I wonder if there will be perhaps flashbacks to Istanbul in 2020, when obviously we went to a brand new resurfaced track and it was very, very slippery. I don't know if you have any intel on the track or what would be your expectations of how the cars are going to go round the circuit?
I think that may well be the case. The track was sort of built on a swampland, wasn't it? So you started to get these massive bumps. In the run up to turn 1, for example, you get that massive bump just as the drivers would turn in. So it was due a resurface, and I'm glad they've taken the opportunity to do so. It'll just throw another curveball because they'll have, as Martin said, they'll have all their simulation numbers. And what happens is Pirelli send engineers out where they have a machine that basically measures the roughness of the surface. And they'll feed that information back to the teams. They'll plug that information back to the simulators and all of that going on. But as we found in Turkey, that doesn't always translate to being exact. The simulators are brilliant, but ultimately it's not quite real life yet. We've seen wet races there in the past. Remember that fantastic win for Sebastian Vettel? We had a great one with Schumacher 2006 as well. I think his last win was there, wasn't it, in 06 in the Ferrari? So we've seen some brilliant races there over the years, and I'm looking forward to watching it.
Martin, it does bring back memories of Istanbul, doesn't it? Where it was almost farcical with the drivers going off and skidding. But I mean, look, that was Lance Stroll got a pole that week, didn't he? So who knows?
And led the race comfortably for a good while. That's about the oils that come out from a new surface, and they just sat on the top in Istanbul and got mixed up with some water and turned into the equivalent of sort of ice, really. And the drivers were lap after lap after lap before they could get any grip. It just made for a fascinating Grand Prix. But I don't know the details of the surface in Shanghai, to be honest, or exactly how long it's been down. But there's no doubt about it. F1 cars do burn a racing line quite quickly into a surface, as long as they get enough dry laps on it.
Unpredictability, that's what we like, certainly as fans, maybe not as engineers or strategists. Just time then to tell you about the Chinese Grand Prix. So it's going to be another early start, but fortunately for us in the UK, our final early start before we settle into some more reasonable times. You can of course catch all the build-up and all the action from the Chinese Grand Prix, not this weekend after, across Sky Sports F1. But yeah, that's it. Thank you, Karun. Thank you, Martin. Fascinating chat. Very good to have your company. We will be back next Tuesday to look back, or to look ahead, I should say, to the Chinese Grand Prix. Hope you can join us then. Bye for now.